to put across some of our thoughts which are put in this book. I have prepared a PowerPoint or a presentation that will help us to better understand this uh, book and the labor that has gone in the process. Ramat photos first. Yeah. We know enough uh, have been said and written about indigenous peoples, tribals, indigeneity, and uh, who are they, where do they live, and so on. But very few literatures or the perspectives we see from the peoples themselves, from the periphery and the indigenous peoples themselves. So, keeping in mind, we wanted to articulate a people's point of view. The tribals, what do they say about themselves? What do they mean by indigeneity, or how do they practice indigeneity in their everyday life? So, keeping in mind this, uh, we organized a seminar here 2 years back, not 1 year, 2 years back, on 14th and 15th of December 2023. So this is the outcome of that. As an introduction, just try to introduce some of the thoughts. The tribals or indigenous communities, indigenous peoples in general are the custodians of rich sociocultural heritage, biodiversity, and ancient governance systems that have sustained them for ages. Indigenous peoples, including hunters, fishers, herders, and others, are stewards of over 25% of the world's surface area, and approximately 80% of Earth's biodiversity is located within those areas. So we can imagine how much biodiversity is still existing in the areas where indigenous communities are living. The indigenous peoples in the Indian subcontinent have been living for ages, having their own customary practices and a set of accepted rules and customs to govern the communities. The Indian Constitution outlines important provisions for the protection and empowerment of indigenous peoples or Adivasis or tribals in India. According to the 2011 census, tribes or indigenous peoples in India constitute about 8.6% of the country's population. They contributed immensely to the country's diversity with unique and distinct customs, languages, religions, and ways of life. Going back the total country's population, India has one of the largest indigenous populations in the world. The question of tribal development is a pressing concern in post-independent India. Since post-independence, several programs and policies have been introduced that target the development and improvement of the living conditions of the tribes, focusing on health, education, employment, food security, livelihood, and income generation, etc. Also, several special constitutional provisions are being framed for the tribes to protect their socio-cultural interests and political rights, particularly on issues concerning affirmative actions, issues of governance, political representation, and access to resources, among others. In the whole discourse of the tribal development, the constitutional provisions and protection of rights and privileges, the perspective of the perspectives from within had been sidelined. So this is the crux of the seminar. The perspectives from indigenous communities have been sidelined, and therefore we wanted to uh, get articulated from the people themselves. So against this backdrop, a 2-day national seminar was organized with broad aims to carry forward the discourses on indigeneity. There is a need to perceive and articulate concepts of indigeneity from different perspectives. The seminar was an attempt to understand and articulate discourses on indigeneity from the perspectives and experience of indigenous communities and peoples. Therefore, the objective of the seminar was fourfold. One was to articulate indigenous human formation, which we call in our academic language education, but indigenous communities calls it as human formation, integral formation, not only in terms of earning degree or uh, literacy. Second objective was indigenous governance systems and political participation, which they would call tribal self-governance. Then third objective was sustainable production and conservation patterns in indigenous communities, which is known as indigenous economy. How do they practice economy in their everyday life? Then the fourth objective was the indigenous knowledge systems in climate sustainability from the perspectives of the indigenous peoples. So this is indigenous knowledge system in promoting and conserving the ecological sustainability. So these four areas were there as objectives for the seminar, and around this many papers came. Another important objective of this seminar was to bring different class and categories of people, indigenous peoples themselves, the scholars and academicians, also grassroots activists on indigenous issues and concerns, and the community leaders who are working in the community development as the ambassadors of indigeneity together on one platform. So this was the a kind of uniqueness of this seminar, where different categories of people came together: the academicians, the community leaders, and the activists who work for tribal development came together at one platform. Uh, it was an attempt to break the conventional academic boundary to let in the fresh air on indigeneity from the people themselves. So, for this task, we had so many supporters who came forward to support us. One was USAID, then their allied organizations, Anamai Foundation, Piramal Foundation also came up in support of us. Then, of course, Indian Social Institute, we, then Tribal Affairs, CVCI Office for Tribal Affairs, then Indigenous Peoples Forum. So, so many organizations came together in support of this seminar to jointly organize it and promote it. We got a very overwhelming response from many partakers from different parts of the country. We selected 17 papers, and there were two panel discussions on indigenous human formation and also ecological sustainability. Then among those papers presented, we selected 10 papers out of them and published uh, as a book, which is in front of us today. So these 10 papers, all those who presented the paper here and also reworked on it, and there were others uh, behind the scene who were helping us to really complete this task to publication. Uh, I would remember here Professor Virginis Khaka, who has been always with us to support in this kind of endeavors. Then Dr. Vijayani Mishra from Delhi University, and from Ambedkar University, Tina Anil were great help for us to do the proofreading and help us. I have some people to thank again. The authors who have participated first in the seminar, then later on reworked on their own papers as per the suggestions given to them and made it publishable. All the authors, the publisher, our executive director here in Indian Social Institute, the sponsors, the proofreaders, the community elders, especially the community elders. I would remember who has taken one in the indigenous human formation. uh, he started about how indigenous education system should be, and he started Kurukh medium school in Jharkhand, and which is flourishing. So he himself came here, one of the community leaders, another community leader from South Gujarat who came here to speak to us, especially about how he is personally and together with community mobilization, how he is able to really take care of the whole mountain in terms of increasing the greenery and planting more trees, taking care of biodiversity. So, people who are practicing indigeneity, they themselves came from the field. From Maharashtra, we had from Gadchirauli, Devaji Tofa, who is the pioneer of tribal self-rule, and he is one of the persons who is recognized by the country and other countries also as a pioneer of a champion of tribal self-rule, who has really implemented tribal self-determination and autonomy in their everyday life, how they are practicing it. And also we had uh, an individual from Chaibasa, Jharkhand, to speak on how tribal traditional knowledge system is at work in their everyday life. So these were some of the community leaders who really contributed what we cannot find in the books, but through their own experiences, they were able to articulate the practice of indigeneity in their everyday life. Here we see in this picture two stones are standing here. This is part of the Pathalgadi movement, which in the about 10 years before, it was a movement. Actually, Pathalgadi is a long-lasting movement, especially in the indigenous communities, and it is an age-old customary practice, in fact, among the tribals across the world, not only in India. It is a symbol of self-rule, self-determination, autonomy, and indigeneity in practice. But it was seen by the Indian state uh, as a threat to the establishment, and therefore this movement was termed as anti-national, anti-constitutional, and many people in Jharkhand, in Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and so on, they were put behind bars to stop this movement of self-assertion. But that still continues because this is kind of expression of their identity and self-determination. And that's why we thought this could be, but there is no other thing better than this to express the practice of indigeneity among indigenous communities, because this is one form of it, but there are different types of pathalgaris actually. There is one of sasandiri. One is called sasandiri, that is also a pathalgari, which is erected in the honor of the dead persons. There is another burudiri. Burudiri is called to inform the settlement in that particular area, demarcation. Taididiri, another type of Patalgadi is called Taididiri, to symbolize the political rights of the people, where they will write their political rights on the stone and erect it. So that will be Taididiri, not Sasandiri. Then there is a Hukumdiri. Hukumdiri, another type of Patalgadi, which is to make public declaration about social and customary rights. So different kinds of rights and indigeneity is expressed in different kinds of Patalgadi, which is when we do not know, then we term it as kind of anti-national, anti-state, and breaking away from the country. They are trying to make their own country and so on. So there is a call to know more closely and to study more deeply about the uh, uh, practice and beliefs and the ways of life of a community, about which we often write and speak, maybe without knowing the full truth. So it calls for an deeper engagement into our academic discourses and also in productions that we do. So therefore, this musings on indigeneity is an invitation, which is useful for scholars because this is perspectives articulated from the indigenous peoples themselves about their way of life, about their governance, about their education system. So I think this will be very useful for students and also for academicians, for researchers. Thank you.